Adding a yoke to your design is actually a very simple process. To do this, trace off your sloper all the way around and include any darts. Draw in your dart legs. Decide where you'd like your yoke style line to be. In this example, I'm going to draw a curved yoke line, but the important thing to remember for any line is that it must begin at the center front and end at the arm's eye. You can also draw a straight across yoke line, or if you like the Western style variation, it's very easy to get one simply by drawing in the pointed shape. To finish your yoke pattern, slash along the design line, tape on some extra paper, and draw in your seam allowances. To get the correct angle on the curved edge of your seam allowance, determine which way the seam allowance will be pressed in the finished garment. Usually this is up towards the yoke. So what I'm going to do is fold the seam allowance back towards the yoke and then simply snip off any excess paper. This will give me the correct angle for the finished pressed seam allowance. Then, because this seam allowance is also going to be pressed up, I'm just going to lay this over top, transfer this line, and snip there to get the correct angle. This little shirt is a great real-world example of the Western style yoke. As you can see, it's simply a design line drawn onto the bodice and then cut out of a contrasting piece of fabric. Here's a very clear example of a basic curved yoke. This is the Melody Valerie schoolgirl dress, and as you can see there's a yoke here, and then the bodice itself is princess seamed below that. Next, we're going to show you how to create a yoke design with shearing along the top of the yoke. This is a really pretty decorative effect, but it can also be used to absorb the dart fullness. To begin, trace off your entire sloper, including any darts and the bust point. Then draw in your yoke style line. Cut out the entire pattern and slash away the yoke. Draw in your slash line from the bust point to about the center of the yoke design line, and then extend the center leg of your dart from the bottom all the way up to the bust point. Slash along both lines, stopping just shy of the bust point. Pivot the pattern to close the waist dart and tape into position. Fill in your dart with a piece of scratch paper and then tape it into position. Then, using your pencil, draw a smooth line along the top of the shearing area. Add seam allowances to both the yoke and the sheared portion, and then mark notches where you'd like your shearing to begin and end. It doesn't have to be exactly where you pivoted the dart fullness out. You can spread it out a little bit for a more pleasing effect. Then, working from the outside edges, transfer your shearing notches to the yoke. Creating a back yoke follows the exact same principles and steps as creating a front yoke. Trace around your sloper, draw in your design line, slash and add seam allowances. In this example, we're going to take the basic back yoke one step further and add shearing along the edge. Now you could do this in the same way as we just showed you with the front yoke with shearing, especially if your back has a dart, by pivoting the dart up to the yoke line. However, in this case, we want more fullness than the dart alone would give us, so we're going to slash and spread to create additional fullness. Needless to say, this process will eliminate the need for the back dart, so I'm going to begin by erasing it from my pattern. The first step in slashing and spreading is to draw a stabilizing line. This is a line perpendicular to the direction you'll be slashing to ensure that all the pieces stay lined up with each other. It doesn't really matter what part of the lower bodice you draw this in. I'm going to draw mine in right about here. Next, draw in your design lines to slash along. We're going to draw in 3 lines, spacing them about evenly across the top of the yoke line. Slash along these lines. Starting with a fresh sheet of paper, draw on your stabilizing line. And then lay your pieces on the paper, lining up the stabilizing line and spacing them about evenly apart. In this example, we're placing them all about 1/4 inch away from each other. When you have them spaced to your liking, tape them down to secure. Draw on your seam allowances before cutting out your piece, and add seam allowances to your yoke as well. As a final step, add a notch to indicate where to begin and end your shearing. Transfer this notch to the yoke. This little shirt is a great example of a back yoke with shearing beneath. Creating a combination yoke is actually very easy. This is a traditional shirt making technique which eliminates the shoulder seam. To do this, all you need is a completed front yoke and back yoke. Simply line them up at the shoulder seam and tape them together. If desired, you can add an additional piece of paper underneath for stability. To sew with this yoke, you would cut along the fold on this line and add seam allowance to both the neckline and the arm's eye. You can also create a midriff yoke, which basically runs along the waistline of the doll and absorbs some of the fullness of the dart. Begin by tracing off your sloper. Draw in both legs of your waist dart up to the bust point. Cut out your sloper. Fold your dart closed, beginning at the center leg. Then draw in your yoke style line from the center front to the side seam. For this example, we're going to do a very simple straight midriff yoke. Tape the dart closed beneath your style line and slash the pattern apart. Open out the top section of the pattern and smooth out the line. Add seam allowances to your pattern. As a reminder, the seam allowances in this case will be pressed down towards the midriff yoke instead of up towards the shoulder yoke. So fold your seam allowances down to figure out the angle. And then transfer to your upper pattern piece. Add notches and tape your completed exercise into your pattern notebook. To complete a matching back midriff yoke pattern, simply repeat the same steps, being sure to match up the design line at the side seam. If your doll has a bust dart, you can still create a midriff yoke and eliminate the bust dart. First, begin by drawing both your waist and your bust dart to the bust point, folding the waist dart closed and drawing in your style line. Then what you're going to do is measure the depth of the bust dart and measure the same distance up from your style line. Draw a straight line tapering to somewhere on your midriff yoke. Then tape your pattern closed and slash along both of these design lines to take out the equivalent fullness of the bust dart. Smooth out this line here and erase your bust dart. So here you can see that this amount taken out is the same size as the bust dart, just moved further down on the bodice. To complete your pattern, you would add seam allowances and shearing notches as standard practice. This adorable little hoodie was originally part of the Liberty Jane Malibu Libby collection. As you can see, it's got a midriff yoke and also shearing along the shoulder panel and along the center front of the midriff yoke.